Welcome to our webinar on lump sum funding in Horizon Europe. My name is Ulrich GENSCHEL. I'm head of sector in DG RTD, working on the simplification of our funding processes. Together with my colleague Andreia CHICOS, I have the pleasure to guide you through the webinar today. We have 2 hours to explain all the aspects and answer your questions. To start with, I'm going to give an overview presentation, and this is going to be followed by a session with 3 invited guests who already have a lot of experience with lump sum funding because they are participating in lump sum grants at various stages of the life cycle of these grants. And then this is followed by a Q&A session where you are invited to post your questions in Slido. I believe the Slido details have been shared with you in advance. Then we are going to answer these Slido questions by order of popularity. So I invite you to post your questions addressed to us or to the guests with all their experience. And maybe you can also wait doing that until we have gone through the presentation and through the discussion with our guests, because many of your questions might already have been answered by then. But you're already free to post questions now if you like. With that little introduction, I think I am ready to start the presentation. And now, before I go into the presentation proper, I'd like to highlight 2 things. Lump sum funding works in many ways in the very same way as traditional grants. So in case you have experience with our traditional actual cost-based grants, we call them, many aspects, if not most aspects, are really the same. The only thing that really changes is how we reimburse costs. So only the financial aspect of the grant changes, nothing else does. And maybe the second thing to highlight is this presentation cannot cover all aspects of funding, of Horizon Europe funding. We are really focusing on the things that are different in lump sum funding. So it's not covering every last detail that would be interesting for Horizon Europe and its grants, but focusing on where we really have differences for lump sum funding. So with that, let me get started. Why do we use lump sum funding in the first place? You see 3 reasons here in no particular order. Historically speaking, we had a lot of pressure to reduce the financial error rate in the program. It's been always one of the highest error rates in the EU budget, in the research area, and there was wide agreement this needs to come down. And lump sums are indeed a measure to bring this financial error rate down, because we can really expect to have much fewer such errors. Then, maybe even more important, is the significant simplification potential, because what lump sums do in the first place is they remove the obligation to report actual costs. So there is no further need to keep financial records or to report these financial records or to make complicated calculations on what are eligible costs that can be reported. There's also no reporting on the resources used. So especially this should be easier for beneficiaries that have limited experience so far. And then last but not least, we also like to focus more on content. That is automatically the case, we believe, because we pay lump sums against the assurance that the project was executed as agreed, that is, that the activities were carried out as agreed, and that triggers the payment. So automatically everybody focused more on the fact that the project was actually carried out. Of course, it goes without saying that you have all the possibilities to change the course of the project as in any other grants. And we come to all this in much more detail in the next 30-40 minutes. This is just to illustrate how skewed the distribution of participation in our program really is. You see in this little graph on the right-hand side, there's just a couple of hundred beneficiaries, that is organizations, that have more than 100 grants within a framework program. This is here the example of Horizon 2020, the predecessor of Horizon Europe. So just a few hundred out of 42,000 unique beneficiaries. So very, very few large organizations have many, many grants, and therefore they have a lot of experience. They know the rules, they also know the financial rules, and generally speaking, they have a lower error rate. But on the left-hand side of the graph, you see that the vast majority of unique beneficiaries just have 1 or 2 grants. And it's exactly those beneficiaries that typically struggle more with these complex rules, that therefore also have a lot more errors. And we cannot really expect an organization that has 1 grant in a 7-year period to have a steep learning curve or to have a dedicated department that deals with the complexities of actual cost funding. So for those, we need a system that works the first time they use it. And here we believe that lump sums are the solution, because they can work both for our one-time participants and they can work for the large beneficiaries that participate very frequently. Now, we've introduced lump sum funding as early as 2018, so really already 6-7 years ago. And in this course of introducing it step by step, there were quite a few concerns raised, and we are fully aware of those concerns. But generally speaking, we don't see any blocking issues with that. So there was in particular the notion that you have a lot more work setting up a lump sum proposal compared with a traditional proposal, that there would be less flexibility, and maybe even more important, that there is a higher financial risk, meaning people were afraid that we were going to pay them less in a lump sum grant than in a traditional actual cost grant. However, we've seen now by experience that effectively none of that is really the case. There is, for example, when you look at the work at the stage of proposal writing, indeed, we need some more details to be submitted, but that hides the fact that every applicant needs to have those details. They just don't need to submit them. And the difference really is that the details that everybody must have need to be submitted in a template that we provide. Then maybe one more example when it comes to the financial risk. We now have very robust data that show that indeed, if anything, the level of payment in lump sum grants is slightly higher, but certainly it isn't lower than in the traditional grants. So there is really no sign of financial disadvantages for the beneficiaries of lump sum grants compared with the traditional grants. So on that basis, we decided to carry on with lump sum funding and to increase it step by step to a higher share in our program. Now, how does it really work in practice? There are 2 different lump sum options. This webinar is really mostly focusing on type 1 lump sums, which is on type 2 lump sums, where you define the lump sum in your proposal. So the beneficiary, the applicant, puts in the proposal the amount that they consider is needed to carry out the project, and this is really the responsibility of the applicant to define and justify the appropriate amount. Type 1 lump sums are used quite rarely, but we have one example, that is ERC proof of concept call, where the Commission sets the amount up front, and then any successful grant will receive that amount that has been predefined. So in the case of ERC proof of concept grants, this is an amount of 150,000 euros. So there is no other amount possible in this type. But as I said, this is the only example so far. I cannot exclude that in the future we'll use this again more. But all the calls that you will normally experience now in the work program 25, for example, will be type 2, where you define the lump sum. Now, and how does that work? Well, I already mentioned we use as much as possible all the processes and procedures that are also used in all other grants. And that is already very visible at the stage of proposal writing. You use exactly the same application form as for any other grant. There's no difference. And you present the objectives, the methodology, and the tasks and the activities in exactly the same way. The guidance that we provide is exactly the same for lump sums and for actual cost grants or for any other grant in Horizon Europe for that purpose. It is the standard application form that is used by everybody. What is different is that in lump sums, you have an additional detailed budget table. That currently is an Excel table which contains the cost estimations, where you enter the cost estimations for each work package and for each participant in the consortium of your application. This is a file that we provide in the download area when you in your submission area on the Funding and Tenders portal. Make sure that you use that version that is in the online submission system. Don't use any other versions that might be floating around. We also have an example on the portal somewhere for to illustrate for information purposes. Please use only the version that is associated to your specific call and to your specific topic. I already mentioned, in this detailed budget table, you have to put in the cost estimations for each cost category. Now, there are different cost categories, such as personnel, such as equipment costs, such as consumable costs, other direct costs, travel costs. There's a number of costs. I can't list them all here. They are all in this file, and you will have to provide these cost estimations for each of the work packages and for each of the partners. And the key principle here is you need to make sure that these costs fit your usual accounting practice, your usual practice when you budget for a research and innovation project. They are subject to exactly the same eligibility rules as any other grant. And what that means is anything that is fundable in any Horizon Europe grant is also fundable in a lump sum grant and is therefore eligible as a cost that you can include in your proposal. Obviously, and this is the measuring stick that we apply. These cost estimations, they cannot be accurate to the cent or to the euro. These are estimations, and we are fully aware that these are estimations. What does matter is that these estimations are reasonable and non-excessive, and this is really the check that is going to take place afterwards, that the lump sum that you define and that you justify is really reasonable and fits the project that you propose. Right, and once you have filled in these cost estimations, this Excel file will automatically calculate a breakdown of lump sum shares. So you have one lump sum share per work package and per participant. And this is in the end what will be visible in the grant agreement. We'll see later that all these detailed cost estimations are not part of your grant agreement, only the final breakdown of lump sum shares per partner and per participant. Make sure that when you do this for the first time, that you read the instructions which are found on the first page of that Excel table. Another thing to look out for is the work package and the breakdown of your work plan into work packages. Now, that is something perfectly standard in all our grants. The work plan is broken down into work packages. And as always, the work packages must be a major subdivision. They cannot be just individual tasks or tiny parts of the project. We have no intention to have an extremely high number of tiny work packages. However, in lump sum funding, you have the option, and I underline the option, not the obligation. You have the option to split work packages along the reporting period. And why do we give that option? Because, well, in lump sum funding, you will only get paid once the work package is complete. So if a work package is ongoing, is not yet complete at the time of reporting and payment, we can't pay it. We will only pay it once it's complete and once you have declared it as completed, and we'll see that principle again a bit later more, but here suffice it to say, at the time of the end, at the reporting period, when the reporting period ends and you could be paid and your work package isn't finished, you can't be paid. Therefore, in order to optimize your cash flow, what you can do is you can split the work packages in 2 or even in 3, and then generate smaller work packages that finish at the end of the reporting period. And in that way, you would be able to be paid for that smaller work package at the end of the reporting period. And you wouldn't have to wait for that partial payment, I could say, or for that payment for that part of this work package until the full work is done. I show you an example in this slide. So you see at the top a single long duration work package. It's a work package for project management. This is very typical work package that lasts for the entire duration of the project. So in this case, for 4 years, spanning all 3 reporting periods. Now, in an actual cost grant, you could get paid for this work at the end of each reporting period. So you could have 3 payments for this management work. In a lump sum project, in the situation that we see at the top, you would only be paid for this management work at the very end of the grant, at the very end of the project. If you think it is necessary to make sure that you get paid for this work at the end of each reporting period, you are allowed to split it in 3. This is shown at the bottom. So the split situation shows you where management is now being split into 3 management work packages, management 1, 2, and 3. The content is equal in each case. You don't have to, in actual fact, repeat the content of these work packages. You could, for the second and the third installment of this work package, you could just refer back to the first initial description. So no need to, as compared to the situation at the top, write down 3 times the same content. And in this way, indeed, you could be paid at the end of each reporting period. And I again would like to highlight, this is also possible for this is not only possible for management, but for any other work package, this principle holds. But we invite you to consider carefully whether this splitting is really always necessary. Also, given that the only background for splitting is cash flow. There is no content-related reason. There's no scientific, technical reason. It's only to allow you to optimize the cash flow in the project. And in many projects, we pay you an upfront pre-financing payment of 50 or even 80% of the total grant amount. And in these situations, it is indeed questionable whether you always need to absolutely optimize the cash flow in the project, in the course of the project, and whether it might actually be simpler and easier to just keep the unsplit situation because you have enough pre-financing to carry you through to a later step in the project to be paid for it. But this is your consideration. I'm just highlighting splitting is an option. It is there only to optimize cash flow for no other reason, and it is for you to decide whether it is needed or not, and therefore use it wisely. Now we come to the evaluation. You've submitted your lump sum proposal. We now come to the evaluation. Again, the key basic process is the very same. We use the standard evaluation criteria, which are excellence, impact, and implementation. Now, what is different is that under the criterion of implementation, we now take a close look at the budget that you submitted. You know that in actual cost grants, we don't really look at, we also look, of course, that projects are reasonable and that the overall budget is fit, but we don't look at any details also because these cost details haven't been submitted. So, but in lump sum grants, we look at all these details in quite some detail, and our experts who will evaluate this, they will make sure that your estimations are reasonable and non-excessive. That is what I said is before our key criterion, to make sure that we get a reasonable lump sum, a reasonable proxy for what the project would cost in a real cost situation, no more, no less, but we want to get as close as possible to that situation and agree it upfront. And of course, they will evaluate that the way that you split the lump sum across the work packages and across the partners is indeed fit to allow all the partners and all to do their work and all the work packages to be completed. Now, our experts can very well make concrete recommendations if they find that some of your cost estimations are not reasonable or that are not fit for purpose. And in this case, we invite them to make very concrete recommendations to change that budget. This could indeed also include the possibility to reduce the lump sum here or there. I can already share this does happen in practice, probably in around 10% of the evaluations, probably 10% of the proposals that are selected for funding. We see some changes. Most of these changes are not very large, but they are there. So they are not making it sort of impossible for you to carry out the project at all. They are typically just a few percent. In few cases, we have also bigger changes. Principle that applies here is that if we change the lump sum budget and we correct some of your estimations, we do not hold this against you. This will not lower your score. This will just be a correction in the budget, but will not affect your chance of being selected for funding. So only in case that your budget is flawed, that your budget is really very far from reasonable, and or that essential information is missing and this proposal cannot really be, and the budget cannot really be evaluated, in this case you would indeed face a decreased score. In this case, your chance of being selected would go down. But if it's just for a few corrections of budget estimations that you made, there is no effect. We'll just make these corrections, and otherwise your chances are completely unaffected. What our experts use is for the personnel costs, which are by far the largest share on average in our grants. They use our Horizon dashboard for lump sum evaluations, which shows statistical data on personnel costs as they are used in different countries and in different organization types. And you may very well, these data of course are public and transparently available. We are updating these data frequently, 2-3 times a year, and we only use the latest 2-3 years of data as they occur in our program. So what this data really show is how many person months were funded at a given cost, at a given rate per month in a given country and a given organization. You see two examples here: research organizations in Romania, and at the bottom you see research organizations in Germany. Indeed, personnel costs inside the European Union and beyond are very different in different countries. So our experts cannot be familiar with all of those details. So they get this statistical data to help them make judgments whether the cost estimations you provided are reasonable. Key principle here is if you are above the range of costs that are shown in the Horizon dashboard, that is a situation where you belong to the 20% most expensive organizations that you belong to. That is, we compare you with the same type of organization in the same country. We are not going to compare you with other countries or with other organizations which we know have a different cost structure. But let's say if you belong to the 20% most expensive research organizations in Germany or the 20% most expensive organizations in Romania, in other words, you have a cost which is above the range that is shown here. That is perfectly possible, and this may very well be approved for funding. But we invite you. No, we don't only invite you. We ask you to, in this case, specifically justify why this high cost is needed. And this could be, for example, that you need specifically highly qualified staff in your project, that you had particularly high pay rises recently. There could be other reasons, but we want to know these reasons why you need to motivate why you are above this range. Why are you among the 20% most expensive organizations in your case? The experts are going to look at this information that you can include in the Excel file in the comment section, and this should, of course, also be borne out by your proposal. In other words, it should be clear that you indeed need very highly skilled staff for a certain type of work. And in this case, I have no doubt this will go through and will be approved. Now we come to grant preparation. You've submitted your proposal, it's been evaluated, it's been successfully evaluated, you've been invited for grant preparation. Now the next step is to indeed start a more or less standard process to prepare the grant agreement. indeed, we also have the no negotiation principle that applies. You have a slightly different model grant agreement. That is, many articles in this grant agreement are exactly the same as in any other grant. But what is different is that the financial part is different. Basically, all the articles that govern the financial rules for actual costs are absent in this model. Instead, we define the lump sum in the grant agreement. You see the share for each beneficiary and for each work package, and we know that these shares will be paid when the work packages have been delivered. So that we'll see again a little bit later in more detail. And the no negotiation principle really says that this is in principle a take it or leave it approach. We send you an invitation, we tell you this is the maximum grant amount that you can get. This is the project that you prepared. In principle, we are not there to change that at this stage. But what we can, of course, do is we can correct obvious errors that may have been detected. There could be other changes that are necessary to comply with the rules. Maybe there is last-minute changes in the consortium. Of course, that needs to be taken into account. And of course, we may adjust the lump sum following the recommendation of the expert. So this could, of course, be done during the grant preparation phase. We could also hear you on those aspects during the grant preparation phase. And then comes a final decision on what is really the final lump sum at the end of the grant preparation phase. I already mentioned that this breakdown is then included in the grant agreement, and I highlight again all these budget details that you submitted with your proposals are not part of the grant agreement. All these details, they were only necessary, and they were a necessary step to define and justify and agree the lump sum. But then afterwards really have a true lump sum approach. We only know the total amount for this grant and how it is broken down per beneficiary and per work package, and no other details are financially speaking known and relevant. All these details, of course, we keep on file, but generally speaking, they are not going to be used again once the grant is signed. That is the principle that once the lump sum is fixed, I have it here at the bottom of the slide, it will not be questioned even if the prices for goods or services change afterwards. And that is true for any direction. And this could also be that you had a piece of equipment that becomes cheaper or that becomes more expensive in the course of your grant. We are not going to reopen the discussion on the lump sum as a consequence of these changes. And here is, for the first time, a graph that shows you this breakdown that I've mentioned now several times. This is how the lump sum really looks, what it looks like in the grant agreement in Annex 2. You have the distribution, you have the lump sums for beneficiaries for each participant in the rows, and you have the work packages in the columns. So in the last row, you see the total lump sum for each work package. And in the last column, you see the total share of lump sum per beneficiary. So beneficiary A has a lump sum share of 1,150,000. Beneficiary D has a lump sum share of 420,000. And the total lump sum for this grant is 3 million euros. The lump sum here is the same, is equivalent to the maximum grant amount. So if all work packages are completed and accepted, the consortium will at the end receive 3 million euros. In terms of budget flexibility, because that's also something which gives rise to a lot of confusion, the flexibility is, if you like, unlimited, because you must be aware that you do not report to the Commission on how you use these lump sums. There is no cost reporting, so the only thing that we are going to make sure is that you have actually carried out work packages 1 to 8, and then once we have been convinced that you have carried out work packages 1 to 8, we are going to pay them. But what you actually do with these amounts and how they are actually spent is invisible to the Commission. That is why you have unlimited flexibility effectively on how to use it. That is all internal cuisine of the consortium, really. We are only interested, after we have agreed this 3 million euro lump sum, that you carry out the activities in this project. And maybe this sentence here at the bottom is also important, that of course you are able and you are absolutely, you are also welcome to change this breakdown of lump sum shares if there are changes, if there are technical changes. For example, if beneficiary D starts doing a lot more work than initially planned and beneficiary A does less work, so tasks are shifted from one beneficiary to another, of course you are able and you are welcome to change the share of, to shift money from beneficiary A to beneficiary D. And if you want to have this included in your grant agreement, you can initiate an amendment process, which will end up with an updated Annex 2, where the 1,150,000 share of beneficiary A will have gone down and the 420,000 share of beneficiary D will have gone up. But you are not obliged to do that, really. As long as you are able as a consortium to deliver on all your work packages, you will finally receive these 3 million euro and you can distribute them inside your consortium according to the contributions of each member. That is really an important principle. We are blind to the use of the lump sum, but we are very interested in you carrying out the project. For the payments that you receive, really the payments are taking place at the very same time, and principally the schedule is the same as always. You get a pre-financing payment and the pre-financing rules are exactly the same as for all other grants. So before the grant starts, you will get the pre-financing, same rules apply and no difference, and the coordinator distributes the amount according to your internal agreement to the consortium agreement, which we assume you have concluded before the grant starts. Again, no difference to any other grant. The interim payments, we can of course have one or more interim reporting periods when there is a payment, and here we don't pay the actual costs, but what we pay is we pay the shares of the lump sums that you have, the shares of the work packages that you have completed by this time. So it works in a way that you declare, I have completed work package 1, 3 and 4, and if that is the case and we agree, you get the shares of 1, 3 and 4. We'll see that in practice in a few minutes. And then at the end of the grant, there is the possibility to make a partial payment, which is not possible at intermediate stage. So we are at the final payment also looking, of course, for you to complete all the work packages. We expect you and we want you to complete all work packages 100%. But in case this hasn't been possible for one or other work package and you only completed it 80%, we are going to pay you 80%. Again, this was, I think, a misunderstanding early on in lump sum funding, that we were going to pay 0 or 100%, all or nothing, black or white, and this is not the case. We, of course, it would be rather unreasonable to not pay you at all if you have completed a work package to 80%. So rather, what happens at the end of the grant if you really haven't been able to complete all work packages 100%? We are going to pay you the share that you really have completed. As in all other grants, we also then release the amount that was retained at the beginning of the grant for the mutual insurance mechanism. I believe this is an amount equivalent to 5% of the grant value. I'm not entirely certain here, but the exact percentage, but in any case, this amount of the mutual insurance mechanism is returned to you, is retained at the beginning of the grant and is returned to you at the end. Now we come to amendments. I already mentioned your grant can be amended, and here in a nutshell, a lump sum grant can be amended in exactly the same way as any other grant, and we've also now introduced in Horizon Europe the very same process as for all other grants. In Horizon 2020, should you still have a running Horizon 2020 lump sum grant, we were a little bit stricter, but now the process for amending a lump sum grant is exactly the same. You have here some examples of what amendment types are possible. And of course, typically there are others, but you see you can change the work plan. And of course, when you change the work plan, typically you would also change the lump sum shares, because if you make one work package bigger than another, or one work package is deleted and others are growing, then the lump sum share distribution would probably also change in line with that. Same is true when you add or remove a partner, which is of course also possible in lump sum grants. Again, the breakdown of lump sum share would probably have to adjust it in line with that. But there's other things that is possible to add new subcontracts or to change the duration of the project. Essentially, all the possibilities for changing the grant agreement that exist are available in lump sum grants as well, with the sole exception that those work packages that you have already completed and that we have already paid, we consider a closed part of the project, and those cannot be amended anymore. It is really once a lump sum work package has been declared as complete and has been paid, it's like this part of the project has ended and we are not touching it anymore. So you can also not amend it anymore. Reporting and payment. So you have started your project, you have carried out some work packages and you have completed them, and now at the end of your reporting period, you again use exactly the same reporting template as in all other grants. And so the technical reporting is really the same. You should probably pay even more attention to clarifying and to justifying, explaining to your project officer why you consider certain work packages complete and at which stage of development all the other work packages are. So then the coordinator can declare work packages completed or not completed. At the intermediate stage, there's no other possibility. Work packages can be complete or not complete. You cannot declare them at this point as 70% complete or something like that. It has to be either at this point, at this stage, all or nothing. And then we are going to pay it fully or not. If a work package is not complete at an intermediate stage, we want to wait until the next reporting period or even until the end of the grant until you have completed it. So at this stage, it's all or nothing. You make sure to explain in your technical report why you believe a work package is complete. The project officer is going to look at it, and in that case, we can pay you for it. Of course, I already mentioned, in the end, at the final reporting period, you also have a third option. You can declare completed, not completed, or partially completed. And when you declare a work package as partially completed, the system will automatically prompt you to enter a percentage. So you then propose to the commission, to the project officer who will check this, which percentage you believe has been completed. Again, of course, you motivate that choice and you motivate that value in your technical report. It's, I think I've mentioned this already, but let's be clear again. What is considered complete has nothing to do with a successful outcome. So we are not judging you against reaching objectives or being successful. We are only judging this on the basis of the activities completed. I often use the example of a clinical study where if we have agreed in your grant agreement that you are going to carry out a part of a clinical study, we want to see that you've really carried it out. It could have been an entirely disappointing and negative outcome, and we are still, of course, going to pay it if you've carried out. But if the clinical study didn't take place, or significant parts of it didn't take place, then, of course, we cannot pay. That is the principle here. We want to see that the activities took place. We are, of course, also very much welcoming, and we would also be very happy if you have positive and successful results in your grant. But that is not what we make the payments dependent on. So here now is a slide that shows really the mechanics. Once you have declared your work packages, the financial report, and that is really a major simplification in lump sum funding, because we have pre-agreed the amount that we pay for each work package once completed, and once you now declare that a work package is complete and we agreed, all the rest is effectively automatically done. The financial statements are automatically generated because we know the amount per beneficiary that is basically shown in the grant agreement, and we can therefore then calculate the payment. Here in this case, we see work package 1 is complete. That is a share of 350,000. Work package 2 isn't complete. work package 4 isn't complete, work package 5 hasn't even been started, and work package 3 is also complete. That's also a share of 350,000, so we get a payment of 700,000 euro in this case. And all that is needed in financial terms is that the consortium, the coordinator, declares to us that work package 1 and 3 are complete. The project officer is convinced and agrees with this statement. All the rest effectively is automated. Of course, in this system, what is really important is what is accepted as a completed work package. So, generally speaking, we accept a work package as complete when the activities have been carried out. That is the eligibility criterion, the formal criterion that you have in your grant agreement. You must carry out the work as described in the grant agreement, the activities. Now, work, activities, tasks, that's all synonymous here. It's the work that you have to do as agreed, as described in your grant agreement. You don't have to be successful with this work. But we don't really want to be more strict than in other grants in this regard, and therefore we can also accept a work package as complete as long as you have done all the essential tasks, or when you have done equivalent tasks, or when you have deviations which you have explained and justified. All of that is acceptable, and the work package can still be accepted as complete. In other words, we are not slavishly looking at having every last very little detail of your description carried out. But we want to see that essentially this work package has been carried out, and if there were changes, you can explain these changes, and this is plausible. And I encourage you, if you have really bigger deviations, then use the option, use the possibility to amend your lump sum grant before you want to be paid. And that is really to adjust the grant, adjust the project to the scientific technical developments that have occurred since the beginning of the grant. That is a very common thing to happen in research and innovation projects. There are other developments outside your project. Things are running differently from what has been expected or what has been planned initially. You can adjust your project accordingly, and especially in lump sum funding, I encourage you to make use of that option, such that the description that you have in your grant agreement fits indeed what you have delivered, and therefore we can pay you. Of course, we cannot accept every and any amendment. Your amendments cannot just delete parts of the project. That goes without saying. That is the same principle as in all other grants. Your changes must be reasonable, and the resulting project must effectively be substantially still the same project that has been selected for funding. But within these criteria, you have quite a lot of room for maneuver to adjust your technical, your scientific work as needed to bring it in line with the real developments on the ground, outside your grant, inside your grant, to make sure what you do is sensible and has the best chance of meeting with success. In case your project, your work package is rejected, which can of course happen because the project officer decides, no, I cannot accept that as complete, essential parts are missing, then the project officer is going to provide you with his or her observations, why they believe it's not complete, and you will have the opportunity to respond and explain why, in your view, it is very well complete. Now, on that basis of this exchange, the project officer, the commission, is going to take a final decision. And then in case your work package has been rejected, of course, this is not final rejection. You can carry on carrying out this work package, improving your work on it, completing it, and then resubmitting it at the next reporting period, at which stage it can very well be accepted and paid. And the principle is that you carry on completing and optimizing these work packages that have been rejected until the end of the project, and only then we will maybe consider to pay them partially, which isn't possible, I mentioned several times, in the middle of the project, but which can then happen at the end. That is okay. That's all I want to say here. Summing up, we are certainly giving you some room for maneuver when we're judging your work packages as complete or incomplete. You don't have to be performing, let's say, to a higher standard in lump sum grants than in other grants. But we, of course, want to see that you have, generally speaking, essentially carried out all the essential tasks that have been described in your grant agreement, and make use of the option to amend your grant if you see that bigger deviations will be necessary for technical scientific reasons. Now here's some data to show you that in fact the risks that you face in lump sum funding in terms of payment are very low. You see here all the work packages that have been closed and that have been declared in closed grants, so lump sum grants that have been finished already in Horizon 2020 and in Horizon Europe. We see overall that 99% of these work packages were paid as declared, and only 1% were partially rejected. I emphasize they were partially rejected, they were not fully rejected. So effectively we get a payment level of above 99% in lump sum funding. And at intermediate payment, we also sometimes see these rejections, but again, it's not happening very often. I think in the ballpark of maybe 2-3% of the work packages that are reported at intermediate stage are rejected and will then have to be resubmitted at a later stage when they can be accepted. So that shows to us that the controls that we have in place, they work, but we have no evidence that there's an increased risk, financially speaking, for beneficiaries. To the contrary, if anything, the level of payment is extremely similar. If anything, it's slightly higher than in actual cost grants. But this is not, for me, an important point here. I would like to stress effectively the financial situation that we generate in lump sum projects is extremely similar compared with all our other grants. Your grant is complete. You may, of course, be subject to controls after the grant or after the payment has been taken place. So this is focusing on the proper implementation of the action, especially in lump sum grants. That is through, for example, a technical review. You have carried out the work as you have declared in the grant agreement and as you have reported to us. And then there is, of course, the possibility to check that you comply with all the other obligations in the grant, which are, I should say, exactly the same as in any other grant again. This could be intellectual property right obligations, ethics, open science, publications dissemination. There is quite a number of non-financial obligations, we call them. These are the examples I give, and you must, of course, be in line with those, and you could be checked on those, but there is no difference compared with any other grants. What is absent in your lump sum grant is financial checks, reviews and audits. So in particular, you will never be subject to a financial audit as they are known in actual cost grants. To do these controls, you need to keep some records. And here on the left-hand side, you see what you need to keep, which is effectively all the technical documentation that shows that you've actually done the work, that you've carried out the project. And this is the same again as for all other grants. You don't need to keep any additional technical document for lump sum grants that you do not need for any other grants. The obligation to keep this documentation is exactly the same. This could of course be your technical scientific documentation of the research that was carried out according to good research practices. This could be publications, this could be conference notes, technical documents, this could be equipment logs, anything that shows the work was really carried out. On the other side, on the right-hand side, you see what you do not need anymore. You don't need timesheets, in particular for lump sum grants. You don't need payslips or contracts or the depreciation documents. You don't need any invoices. You don't need any document showing that you incurred specific costs for this project. I have one caveat here. This is true for as far as the European Commission is concerned. So the contract that we sign does not contain the obligation to keep these records or to make the calculations as in actual cost grants. However, for internal purposes for your organization or for national law, you may have obligations to keep financial records, and these are of course unaffected by our grant agreement. So those obligations that you have outside the grant agreement, it goes without saying, but these remain unaffected and these remain in place. For example, we know some organizations oblige their researchers and their staff to keep timesheets. And if this is the case, of course, the fact that we don't need the timesheets doesn't mean that the rules inside your organizations do not apply. But that is something that we cannot influence. This is really for each participant and for each organization to sort out which of these rules apply to them internally or for national law outside our grant agreement. We of course hope that they make use of the opportunities to simplify and, for example, make use of the opportunity to not use timesheets. And we know from surveys and we know from informal feedback that quite a large number of lump sum beneficiaries indeed have stopped doing timesheets, have stopped doing some of those financial tasks, but others are continuing to do so. So we see this as a process where different organizations slowly but certainly stop doing these tasks as they see that lump sum funding works, as they get more experience with lump sum funding, and they really see these documentations are really not needed as far as the Commission is concerned. So you have, beyond this presentation, beyond this webinar, you have a lot of resources on the Funding and Tenders portal. We have a dedicated lump sum page with all the documentation and guidance documents in one place. Particularly if you are new to lump sum funding, I invite you to look at the videos that we have launched last year. They are really sort of a 5-minute introduction highlighting all the main aspects. So if you are new and this is your first proposal, or this is going to be your first proposal, lump sums, please start with these videos and then maybe go on with other more detailed guidance documents available on the portal. You can also contact our research inquiry service. They are there to answer all your questions for Horizon Europe. And of course, they are also there if you have lump sum related questions. Currently, we are working on a number of items which first of all have led to the publication of our monitoring reports, of the assessment of lump sum funding. The last one was published like half a year ago and showed and analyzed how lump sum funding was working so far in the first 5-6 years of using it. That could be very interesting in case you have specific questions on one or other aspect, or you are worried about one or other aspect. You can look in this assessment how these lump sum grants really worked in the last years. We believe these data show that in fact there is no risk from lump sum grants. They have not changed the way research and innovation grants work. They are really effectively only replacing a complicated system for reimbursing costs with a simpler system for reimbursing costs. Then we have, in 24, we have started ex post technical reviews. This is indeed the way we are going to check lump sum grants ex post, and is basically a variant, a more in-depth version of the existing project reviews. So all our projects are of course subject to reviews, to technical reviews. And in lump sum grants, we have a variant now where we look in more depth after the grant in, of course, only a selected number. By far not every grant will be subject to an ex post technical review. This is a statistical sampling process where a small proportion of grants will be checked. And the only thing that you need for these grants really is the documentation I mentioned before, is the technical documentation showing that you've actually carried out the grant. And again, I would like to highlight, this is the documentation you need in any of our grants. In fact, you probably need in any research and innovation grant to be able to show that you've done it. Then we have an important IT project going on to bring this detailed lump sum budget that we have currently in Excel. And Excel has some disadvantages, we know, for some of the beneficiaries. So we bring this into the online submission system. and we hope to have that ready later this year, probably after the summer. And then otherwise, at the bottom of the slide, you see the stepwise rollout I already mentioned. At the beginning of the program, we were at a very low level of about 2%. We went up to a lump sum share around 10% in 23. We now in 24 have 30%. In fact, I think we are already going a bit higher than that. But you see a steep increase, and then by 27, we expect to reach 50%. So I think now in 2025, we probably already reach 40% of lump sum funding in the program. And by 27, we really aim for 50%. This is not yet set in stone, but that is the ambition we have. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I hand over to my colleague Andrea to moderate the session with our 3 invited guests with plenty of lump sum experience already.
Thank you, Ulrich. Good morning, everyone. Indeed, now we will have the panel discussions, and we are very happy to welcome our guest speakers that have been directly involved in lump sum projects and can share their experiences with all of us. So I'm welcoming Pernilla Edlund, project manager at Trafikverket, a government agency in Sweden that is responsible for transport administration. And Pernilla coordinated the Shift to Rail lump sum project into Track 3 under Horizon 2020. Then I'm welcoming Karolina Mackiewicz, Innovation Director at Each Alliance in Ireland, an organization that connects various stakeholders in the healthcare sector. She was coordinator of the Horizon Europe lump sum project Connecting Health. And I'm also welcoming Mark Boonstra, Senior Project Coordinator at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, an organization that is coordinating the lump sum project Multicare under Horizon Europe. So in the next half an hour or so, we will have a discussion on the practical aspects of lump sums, and I encourage those that are following online to also ask their questions to our guest speakers directly, and we will then give these questions to them to answer. And I propose now to start already with the introductory questions. And I will start with Pernilla. So could you introduce yourself and the lump sum project that you coordinated? How long was the project going on?
Yes, thank you. I coordinated, as you said, the Intertrack 3 project. It started in 2020. My work started in 2019 with preparing the proposal and all of that. And then we closed it. I mean, the deadline for the project, when it's supposed to be finished, cannot be moved. So it was closed on December 2023 as planned. And then we finalized all administrative aspects and financial issues over the one more year after. So from 2019 to 2023, in real time for me, was with that project.
Okay, thank you, Pernilla. And now I will turn to Karolina and ask you to introduce yourself and the lump sum project that you coordinated. When did it end?
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Karolina Mackiewicz. I'm the Innovation Director at the ECH Alliance, the Global Health Connector. And our lump sum project was called Connecting Health, connecting the dots within digital health innovation ecosystems. That was the project that was financed by the Horizon Europe under the European Innovation Ecosystems Program, which means that it was the small scale project that was $500,000 project going for 2 years, starting in 2022 in June and ending in 2024. And that project was actually, because we started in June 2022, and I think that most of the project financed under the same call started in September. So actually we had the privilege to be the first one financed from that program as a lump sum So yeah, we went through a little bit like we were a bit of this guinea pig for ourselves and also for the Commission on piloting or checking all those procedures that were explained before. Yeah, so happy to discuss this further, our experience, how this works in practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. And I will now turn to Mark with a similar question. So could you please introduce yourself and the project that you are currently coordinating? When did it start? At what stage is it now? There is a sound issue.
Yeah, it's like classic, right? I was muted. So I'm Mark Boonstra, Technical University of Delft. I'm project manager to a project at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment. It's called Multicare, which stands for, and I need to read it, Multi-Hazard, Low-Carbon, Resilient Technologies and Multi-Scale Digital Services for a Future-Proof, Sustainable and User-Centered Built Environment. So it's a very long title. And it's also a very large consortium. It's got 21 partners from all over Europe. It started in October 2023 and it takes 4 years, meaning that we're at almost at the end of month 18. So at the end of the first reporting period. So we'll end actually next Monday, upcoming Monday. The total grant is 7.5 million euro. Yes, and I would say, but maybe that's for later. It's a bit of an old type of proposal writing into a lump sum systematic, which has led to 26 work packages and 9 work streams. I think that's good to mention. It's got 7 milestones, but it's got 96 deliverables. So there's a lot of reporting going on.
Thank you, Mark. And so now I would say that we can go to the more specific questions regarding proposal writing and grant management. And since I have you on my screen, Mark, I will start with you. So you already told me that so you had maybe a bit more of work packages in this project. And a part of this, so compared to some other proposals that you may have submitted, what kind of differences did you notice in the proposal writing? And what would you advise someone considering to apply to a topic that is using lump sum funding?
In preparation of this call, I noted some points down. And what we see in our proposal, and that's also what I just alluded to, is that the project started out with, I would say, a normal, almost average, a number of 9 work packages, including coordination and dissemination. So let's say 7 more content work packages. And because this proposal was written and submitted in a period when there was maybe some, I would say, unclarity or maybe a bit of anxiety on what lump sum would mean financially, especially with regards to you will only be paid per completed work package. What has happened is that these 9 work packages basically were split in 3, one per project period, meaning that 9 times 3 is 26. So that's what we see. And if you then do, let's say 3 or 4 deliverables per work package, then you end up with 96. So I would say the way our project was devised shows a bit the context where it came from, and also saying that if I look at lump sum proposals that are submitted currently, then you already see that that's improving greatly. And I think one of the reasons is that maybe also that in due course a bit of the anxiety for what lump sum means has vanished. So there is there's a bit more security, a feeling of security there. Further, and I think that's a good thing, because the emphasis is with lump sum is of course on it's easier to implement. There's less financial burden, but there's also another reason behind lump sum, and that's to create better proposals, right? With clearer narratives, I would say clearer from one milestone to the other, clearer dependencies, and I think that's what you see happening currently more than maybe in the past. What I also see, what I experienced in not the writing of this proposal but of another proposal, is that partners, because of this insecurity, were very conservative in the choice of consortium partners. I would dare to say ultra conservative, and that would and that proposal actually was not granted, but there you could see that partners just wanted to work with the people they already knew, because then you're sure that you will finish a work package and get paid. And this is of course a bit counter the idea of lump sum being open, especially for newcomers, SMEs, and what have you. And I think also there this wave of anxiety has slowed down, which I think is a good thing. I mean, it took some time, but that's really good. I sometimes still encounter questions about what will happen, and if there's no financial checks, there must be other checks. There must be a skeleton in the closet somewhere. We should be held accountable. And then always my answer is, and I think this was also in the presentation we saw just ago, that I don't know, chill out a bit. It's not. You get a grant because the Commission wants you to do this research, right? It's not to trap you into anything. I mean, I'm putting it a bit bluntly, but I think it's good to mention that and to bring across that message. And further, on the practical side, watch composing the budget, especially with the Excel, and I very much welcome what I just heard, the idea of getting the budget module in the portal, if I understand correctly, and out of the Excel. That's a great thing, because the Excel was not really practical to use. And the other thing, of course, is that for scientists who are used to the Horizon, or let's say the framework program way of proposal writing, they may not be so used to explicitate or to translate the project course into their budgets. I mean, if you would be experienced in, for example, the European Regional Development Fund, ERDF, or Interreg, you would already be experienced in putting your budget also in year, so in a timeline. And my experience is that if you don't have that experience, then it's not so trivial, actually. I mean, it's more than just explicitating the time course of your budget that was always implicit. I think that's a great difference, because I mean, because the reviewers see your budget and see the detailed budget, there should be a connection between what you promise as research and what is in and how your budget evolves. I think that would be my main pointers.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And one other question now regarding the internal management of your lump sum grant. Do you think that there is something different for this that you want to share?
Yeah, what I experienced when starting this project is that for a lot of people, that's not only with consortium partners, but also internally at your university, it's very counterintuitive to receive 7.5 million euros and not to have to show financial statements. I think I already alluded to this. Yeah, it's counterintuitive. Of course, if you've already done a Marie Curie's, then you're a bit used to that system. But still, there was always like, well, as I said before, where's the skeleton in the closet then? Huh? So if it's not here, then where is it? And there is no skeleton, basically, right? I think this was clearly sketched in the presentation we saw. So that's one thing. More on the practical side, so in the gap phase, indeed, it's way easier because you don't need to address all financial comments that you normally have to, which makes life easier as a coordinator. I know of another lump sum project we have that there was a request to add deliverables on cumulative expenditure, which is like, I mean, this is really an actual cost thing that took some time to get solved, to get clarified. We did this with the help of the national contact point. Apparently there was like more like an old template that was used for lump sums. So like an actual cost template that was used for lump sums. But that was of course not needed, because how can you if you have a lump sum? Then in the implementation phase, there was, when we started, a bit of clarity about budget flexibility and the proper interpretation of that. Also this we solved with the help of the national contact point. Further, if you do amendments, we do amendments. You need to be careful that you cannot amend work packages that have been closed. And that means in our case, for example, that if an amendment still runs when you see the project period and the end of the project period approaching, then you need to take care of that you're not closing work packages in your reporting when the amendment is still open, because that would be a pity. And further, we try to monitor the project actually as any other project. And we do that. So indeed, if we see significant financial changes, we submit or we open an amendment. Of course, although financial reporting may not be needed, there should of course be a connection between the budgets and changes in the in partners' needs or how the project evolves. So the work, the content of the project. And of course, and we do ask our partners. I mean, of course, we don't ask them for numbers, but we do ask them on a periodic basis to state if their budget is still enough for the work they need to do. And we do that to prevent at the end to have partners saying, yeah, sorry, the budget is up, we couldn't do this and this and this. And then if you have dependencies in your project on their work, that will be problematic at the end. But basically we try to keep it, we try to do it as we usually do it. Okay. I think those were my main pointers.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience, Mark. And now I'm also curious to know about your lump sum project, Carolina. So my first question is, what was your approach to selecting the partners in your consortium? Did your lump sum grant require a different consortium agreement than other grants?
Yes, thank you for this question. When it comes to partnership building, I wouldn't say that we build it differently than for any other project. In that sense, we looked for partners that we needed for the action, that we trusted, and well, it was a small project. I will say so different from Mark's or Pernilla's project. It was 4 partners project. And in that sense, well, I will admit that we had partner also from the UK. We had this partner because we wanted to work with them, because we believe that, you know, they're needed for our project. And there we encountered a little bit of issues, but this was more because of the partner being from the UK. And at the moment when we were building the consortium or signing the consortium agreement, the agreement between the UK and European Union about the Horizon Europe was not signed, and that created a lot of issues. But at this moment, those issues are resolved, and it should be easier. So we should not discriminate the partners from the United Kingdom. When it comes to consortium agreement, we worked on the template provided from the European Commission. So also here, there were no special issues. But in general, maybe like going beyond the questions and referring to what Mark said, I still see also, you know, we coordinated Connecting Health. Connecting Health is closed. We were also, as ECH Alliance, partner in another lump sum project, and we are, you know, also working on some other proposals that are a lump sum project. And what I see as a common issue is the anxiety, and that Mark mentioned, being very unsure about how all this works. And despite the fact that we read the instructions, partners are asking questions and don't believe that this can be like that. So, and Mark said, like, we should just chill and relax. And I would say confirm that and trust what is written, and trust that lump sum means lump sum. And I wouldn't say that it's completely true that you will be paid after the work package is ending. There is still prepayment mechanism. So it's not that now we are working for a year or two without being paid, and only after we are closing the work package and we deliver the deliverables and they're approved and there is a review, then we are paid. Still, things work pretty similar to other normal projects, that there is also the prepayment mechanism. So it's not that we have to be, and the same, I trust that, you know, the Commission put this mechanism to make our life easier. And for me as the coordinator that reads the instruction, things are easy, and I don't have any reason to distrust the European Commission. But I see that this is a common issue that is coming, that you know, that this cannot be like that, this cannot be true. And yes, we encountered one issue with the financial officer during the final check, where the financial officer from the European Commission was asking us for financial statements. And we had to explain to the financial officer, like, look, this is a lump sum project. We understand that this is also new for you. But, and this is where, you know, this trust issue is a little bit like shaky. This is where we start to question if we understand, if we've done things for 2 years well, if we told partners well, but it was resolved. And I think that also you at the European Commission are also understanding and training your own staff and financial officers better. So I would say, like, on looking for partners, well, we develop the consortium the same way as we always do, trusting partners, needed partners, partners that we need the expertise for doing the project, with consortium agreement, again, working with the good templates and, you know, following also the what is in the grant agreement when it comes to prepayment and payments and so on. But the key thing is that, you know, to be confident that this is a mechanism that is, you know, put there to make our life easier. And of course, this is a public money, so and we need to commit to using it in a good way. But all our organizations, I believe, have audits and different checks and are subject to different checks. So it's not that we are, of course, spending the money without any control, right? But yeah, just overcoming this anxiety, I will also advocate for it. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, my second question was about reporting, whether this was easier, and you already mentioned.
Yeah, for sure, it was easier. But again, it was like, even with our small consortium, we received questions. We continuously, and as I said, we were doing this like, as first project out of the call for, I think 12 projects were funded under this European innovation ecosystem. And our project was the first one that started and the first one that reported. So of course we were, like, as I said, we are experienced project managers and we have an experienced financial manager in our organization. So we read the instructions and we were following them. But still there were, comments coming from partners like, don't you really need that? Don't we really have to do it? And then when we received this request from financial officers, then we were like really scratching our heads. But we had a call, we explained, and after I think a week, the issue was solved. But I see this in building new consortia, working on another projects, on another proposals, that partners are continuously asking the same questions and they cannot really grasp the idea, or often it's an issue that they cannot grasp the idea that, yes, we don't have to, of course, again, the rules of spending public monies apply. And as public partners, most of us are public partners in those projects, we have, of course, all the rules, but then we don't have to duplicate them to the lump sum projects.
Thank you. So yes, indeed, that's why we need to continue to keep explaining what is lump sums, how they work. So yes, that's important. And so last but not least, now I will turn to Pernilla for the last round of questions. And the first one is about technical amendments. Did your lump sum project require any of these? And if yes, what was the main reason, and did it work as expected?
Yes, thank you. We were 26 partners with some 12 linked third parties associated with one of the partners. So we were quite a few, our work was distributed over quite a few companies and organizations. So yes, it was bound to be technical changes within the project. And we had a few that we collected into actually one amendment. It should have been several, but since we were not as alert as we should have been on the amendment process and kind of underestimated the complexity of it, we ended up with making one large amendment, which should have been cut in several smaller. That would have been better for us and also for our project officer who had to deal with this. There were different reasons why we had these amendments, because there were really more of them, but we, as I said, we put them in one towards the end. One was that we had estimated work in our proposal saying that we will do this solution, we will try a specific technical solution. The Intertrack 3 project was within the railway sector, so we wanted to try new groundbreaking technology for using switches. And that was not possible. It turned out to be not possible to I would say more contract reasons. It turned out to be more expensive to buy this switch and install it that we had in mind. And we had another solution too as well. And we ran out of time really. There wasn't enough time to fulfill this solution and test it out into track, because the railway is structured in a way that it's long processes. You have to be out 2 years in advance to get access to track, for instance, in Sweden, which this was the case where we would test these equipments. And it was simply not possible because the project was only 3 years. So we didn't have the time. And that was a huge, well, not huge, but it was a significant part of our funding. So in that case, we were in a very close dialogue with our project officer, which I think was key to success here, because he encouraged us to find other work within the project, which was still within the boundaries of Intertrack 3, still railway research, within the areas that we have specified, and to make sure that is there research that can be done that can lift other things that we weren't supposed to address, but it's still reasonable and we can still use this and lift it to a higher level. And we said, yes, there is. And so eventually we shifted. So we shifted these things that we were initially intended to do to something else that we were agreed with our project officer that this is, well, it's not the same work, but it's beneficial in the same way to the railway research in Europe. So that was one of the amendments that we had. And another one, the reason for that was entirely different. It was depending on the construction work in Portugal that simply wasn't on time. So they were waiting for them to reach a certain stage in their construction work so they could add this solution that they were to test. But the construction work, well, it dragged on and then didn't finish in time. So that was also, it happened outside of the project. So we couldn't affect that really. And that partner ended up with a budget cut for it. So yes, we had some amendments, and the process is quite cumbersome in my opinion. And it's really nice to have some expert help on that, which we did. And I was very grateful for that.
Okay, thank you. And last question. So as your project has already ended, how was the final payment procedure? So I understood that you received a partial payment. And what would you advise other lump sum coordinators that are managing their grant?
I would say we had in one of our work packages, we had 8 work packages, 5 of them were technical, and in one of them we got a cut. The partners in that work package only received 95 or 96% of their expected funding. And that was due to this issue in Portugal, because it wasn't possible to compensate in any way. It was late in the project and there was not much time to do any more work really. So yes, they got a cut in that specific work package, and some of them took it like, yeah, it's expected because we didn't reach the goals that we were supposed to, and others were a bit, well, puzzled by why does this affect us, because we have done our part. So I guess that was an awakening, perhaps, that they realized that, well, it's for all of you in the work package, not just the failing partner. But I mean, these are the rules, and you need to comply with them. But I think the key was that in the other big changes that we had a really good dialogue with our project officer to mitigate the losses. I mean, the European Union, they want us to use the money, they want us to do good research and evolve the area which we are in, depending on where we are. So it's not like the European Union is sitting there and rubbing their hands and just, we get more money, because they don't. They want us to use it, and they're very helpful. So my advice would be to have a good dialogue with your project officer and make sure that you understand each other's problems and challenges so you can mitigate it together. And don't look at the project officer as an enemy on the other side of the table, because they're your help. They're a good friend of you. So that would be my advice, to have a close contact with your project officer.
Thank you very much, Pernilla, and many thanks again to all of our guest speakers and to the discussion, and for your availability to take part in the webinar today and share all your experiences with us. It's very interesting to hear from you. And now we will go directly to the Q&A session, but before that I would also like to give the floor to Ulrich.
Yeah, thanks very much for your interventions. That was really most interesting, and shows that, yeah, lump sum funding is making progress in that the community that is our applicants and our beneficiaries, they are slowly getting used to it, but we are not fully there yet. But as I think this doesn't really come as a surprise, given that, well, you must imagine we've used virtually for decades the traditional actual cost system, really decades. And lump sums is the new kid on the block, which really we use to a large or to a really significant degree only since 2023. So the wider circles of our participants are only now experiencing it. They're only now starting to experience it. And of course, it takes a bit of time to get used to it. And I agree, this is also the case internally. We have very, very many project officers in the different executive agencies that are indeed these project officers that, for example, Pernilla was just mentioning. And there's also a lot of financial officers. So these also need to get used to it. It is possible that one or other of them haven't fully adjusted to the new system, or maybe in one or other case, they were not aware that this particular grant is a lump sum grant. So we've had these reports that there were sometimes requests for costs in one or other lump sum grant. From various levels, also from the member state program committees. We've always invited them to actually share these cases with us so we can internally follow up and sort of try and educate the colleagues concerned. So far, I have never actually seen a single case, no single case of a request for financial information in a lump sum grant has ever reached me, but I've constantly asked for sending me these examples. So you are very, very welcome. Also, all the people in the webinar, or if you are watching, if you experience such cases, do not hesitate sending them to us. We, as our attitude is not to punish anybody. I mean, this is an error, basically. The idea is then to clarify this error and to maybe improve. Of course, we have also internal trainings. We had a huge internal training program as we started to roll out lump sum funding. It's still continuing, but reaching virtually hundreds of colleagues in the various agencies is not something that happens overnight. So please, if you encounter such cases, that is really something that we would like to hear about. And then, I already mentioned the anxiety. That is something that I'm very happy to hear is slowly subsiding. That's the exact development we want to have. We also saw this in the survey where we asked all the lump sum participants to what extent they are still using financial management, and we really saw a 50-50 divide. There were probably 80-90% of the organizations said that they have stopped at least some of the financial management, and maybe, 10% said that they still do everything as before. They haven't stopped doing any of the financial management that they've done so far, but this is a minority. Most have stopped at least some, and quite a number have stopped all of the financial management tasks. I see this as a development. Probably if we do the same survey again in 2-3 years' time, we hope to see that more organizations have realized really the Commission is not asking for these things. You really don't need timesheets. You really are not expected to provide invoices and so on. And therefore, we can really afford to not keep them. That is what I hope we will see. Maybe last remark on these on technical amendments. Especially, I think, Pernilla, you mentioned one where you had a bigger change. The principle here is exactly the same as in any other grant. So in an actual cost grant, such major changes or significant changes would, of course, be the same, and the principle would be the same. The Commission is not interested in making projects a failure or stopping them. In fact, we stop projects very rarely. I mean, a lot has to happen before we cut a project in the middle, saying, you are no good. This is really a very, very, very tiny fraction of the project that experience that, even when bigger changes are needed because major hurdles are met, we will typically find a solution to rearrange the project in a way that it can be completed and that it can be paid. And I think in the example we heard, even there, I think the cut of, if there was a 4% cut in one of 9 work packages, that sounds to me like that the overall cut for this project was probably in the ballpark of 1% or less. So it's not exactly that this project was experiencing a gigantic cut in the end. There was a cut, but 4% in one of 9 work packages probably translates into a small cut. Last remark on that, we absolutely have also in lump sum grants the possibility to make the cut specific for one beneficiary. It is not per se the rule that, I mean, this is the default approach. We find that the work package has not been completed, it's only been completed 90%, then this 10% cut will by default indeed be rolled out over the participants in that work package, and it will affect them according to their share in that work package. However, we do have the possibility, if there is evidence, if there is absolute clarity, if you actually already declare this shortcoming is due to participant 11, then if the project officer agrees, we can absolutely also change the financial statement such that indeed the cut is assigned solely to one beneficiary. However, what's required for that is basically the evidence that this is really, and the agreement that this is really just this one participant. And then there's the question whether everybody agrees that we really can assign it to only one. But the possibility absolutely exists. Not sure, Pernilla, if you want to come back on that.
Yes, we had that case too, where towards the end, everything was finalized with the financials and everything. And then the project officer said, well, I can't really see that this task was fully completed. And then it was due to some failure with that specific partner. And then the decision was to reduce their funding specifically and not for the entire work package, because it was so focused only on this partner. It has didn't really have any effect on anything else, and it was in the last minute. So yes, we had that case too, and it was only a smaller part, but it was, I mean, it has to be right. So they didn't fulfill exactly what they had said they would, and the justifications for it were not good enough. So yes, they did get a cut.
Right. So there was a specific cut for one specific partner. Then I misunderstood that. It was
No, we had both.
Oh, you had both. One case like this and one. But then where we have, let's say, the collective cut, and you can also in actual cost grants, you can absolutely have collective cuts for actual cost grants as well. I often meet the misunderstanding that in actual cost grants, everybody is completely independent of one another. Now, that is absolutely not the case. In all our grants, there is the collective responsibility and the collective obligation of the consortium to deliver the project. And if there are shortcomings, there's absolutely the possible sanction to cut the grant generally. In other words, that would then cut everybody's reimbursement depending on what the shortcoming is. The idea that you have independent payments in an actual cost grants is like as if we were giving 10 mono beneficiary grants instead of one consortium grant. But that is absolutely not true. The model grant agreement is very clear. The consortium is collectively responsible and may absolutely face collective financial consequences depending on the shortcomings. Now, luckily, in lump sum grants as well as in actual cost grants, this is happening very rarely, but it can happen, of course. So thank you very much. I also hope that we can work together on getting this anxiety curve a bit further down. That is really the right direction. And we've only, in a way, started properly last year. That is what I try to emphasize. We had lump sums since 2018, but at a very low level. If you have 2-3% of the program, then very few people actually experience it. 2-3% of the framework program is already quite some amount of money and quite some amount of grants, but globally speaking, not many people have seen it. And now from 23, 24, and we will have this steep curve going up further in the coming years, very many people more will experience lump sums. And then hopefully the story, the narrative of lump sums will sort of hopefully transpire that indeed you don't face additional risks. And I hope with the Q&A session that we will start now, we can also contribute to that process. Thanks very much. And we will now also assign questions to the three of you as they come from the audience. So I think this is really, the first question is really sort of one of the questions that probably the three coordinators that I guess have faced. And I can really say for the Commission, no, you don't. There are no actual costs required for reporting. And therefore, you know, if you have a grant agreement with us that clearly says that you don't have to have this documentation, then how could we, as the contractual partner, how could the grant agreement is signed by you and by the Commission? So this agreement says very clearly you don't need these actual cost documentation. How could we then come back 2 years later and say, but now we want it? No, there is no backup documentation needed. I can only emphasize again, the only thing that you need is the things that you need to satisfy your internal rules and your national laws. But vis-à-vis the Commission, you don't need this. But of course, and this confused people sometimes, theoretically, in case of fraud, for example, the Commission still, and the European Court of Auditors or the Fraud Office of the European Commission still has access under the contract to your accounting system, and they could look at things and see if what you had done in this lump sum grant was plausible. But that is different from looking at specific costs of this particular project. So you don't need these specific bills, invoices, cost statements for that particular project, and they will never be asked in any audit because there is no financial audit the way you know this financial audit from other grants. And because that audit doesn't exist, we are not going to ask for it. And obviously in a technical audit, we don't do a technical review, I should say, this documentation has no place either. So the answer is no. Next question.
Take this one. You were mentioning that the payment is not being judged upon reaching objectives, but on conducting activities. How do deliverables come in here? So regarding the first part of the question, indeed, so the payment is based on the completion of work packages of activities, and deliverables are part of the continuous reporting. So these are reports that you sent in during the project implementation. So this also built on assessing whether an activity, a task was completed or not. So this would be my question here.
I should add that for the deliverables in general, of course, we expect, like in every other grant, that you have submitted the deliverables and they have been accepted. But a deliverable is often a report. It doesn't mean that the activities in that deliverable have been successful. A deliverable could also be you reporting to us that some work has been done and, well, it had no useful result. That is still an accepted deliverable afterwards. The deliverable does not mean success. So, or I could summarize it like that. Again, the principle applies as long as the activities that are contained in that deliverable have been done, the deliverable should be accepted. For a deliverable to be accepted, it doesn't require the deliverable to have been successful. And finally, there could also be exceptions here, like in actual cost grants. If you explain why one of these, we have many grants which have 100 deliverables. So if you explain why one certain deliverable was skipped or wasn't needed and what else you did instead, that can also be accepted. Or if you explain why that deliverable is going to be delivered only a year later, something like that. All these kind of deviations are possible. You would have to explain, and if accepted, your work package can still be accepted as completed. So it's not strictly needed that every last deliverable of your work package has been delivered, submitted and accepted, but that would be the starting point. That would be the natural thing. If not, you would have to provide, there should be a reason for that. Not sure if one of our coordinators has actually experience with deliverables not being accepted or changed. Pernilla, you?
Oh yes, not being accepted. We have several, but then you get it in return and you get a feedback letter saying, well, this wasn't complete enough and you have to fill out more on this and why, tell us more. And then you have like a back and forth until the project officer is happy. No, I wanted to say that the deliverables is something that you, as coordinators and consortium, you decide what your deliverables will be out from what's the project, what's the problem you're trying to solve or trying to work on. And you say that, well, it would be reasonable for us to have a deliverable named this and this, and it should contain, it would be a midterm report where we say how far we have come in this and this aspect, for instance. So it's not something that the European Union tells you that you should deliver. It's you who say that this is what we think will be a good review of our project. And in addition to this, you will also have the annual periodic reporting, where you state per work package how far you've come in a percentage, and that can be discussed. But it's your estimation. How far do you think you have come with this specific, with your company's work? And that's on the individual company level or organization level. And that's also a way of having a dialogue with the project officer, saying, yeah, well, we're 3 years in and we're 75% ready or finished. And then you can have a discussion on, well, is this reasonable? Should you be 100% by now? Why aren't you? And then you can justify that. So I'll come back to that. It's important to have the dialogue and discussion with the project officer as well.
Very good. Next question. How do you evaluate or how do you come up with a percentage completion of a work package in practice? So there is, of course, no formula to use, but what you can do is you can really count the tasks. Typically, work packages are broken down in a substructure. Typically, these are tasks, and each task should come with an estimate of resources as well. So you have some weighting there. So if you have 10 tasks, the 10 tasks may not all have equal weight. So that gives you already a way of assessing or of coming up with a rough percentage, because a certain number of these tasks may be complete and a certain number of them may be incomplete or half. So this is the structure that I would advise. You should not evaluate it based on the money that was spent in one way or another by one partner or another. It is really, you look at the breakdown of your work package in tasks and the resources that were planned for it. And along this structure, you come up with the percentage.
And that would also be important when you formulate your proposal, because you need to think when we are evaluated towards this, because the proposal in the end, after some back and forth, will be your contract. Once approved. And so it's important that you write the proposal in the way that you can use it for follow-up. And you can say that, yes, we did this, or no, we did not do that because of, but we tried and we should get the funding anyway.
Yeah, very good point. And this is let me just add, and this is the same in all our grants. The guidance that we give on how you describe the work plan and how you describe the work packages, and you break them down into tasks and activities and you assign resources to it. This is the same in all our grants, because also in an actual cost grant, of course, we need to have some sort of link, logical and plausible link between the work that is proposed and the maximum budget that is agreed. And that is quite obvious. So you also, in all our grants, we are expecting you to put in the proposal a detailed breakdown of your activities, such that afterwards we can monitor whether these projects have been carried out. Now, we have this higher focus in lump sums, of course, but that sometimes hides the fact that also actual cost grants need to be carried out and need to be monitored. Our focus is, well, the focus of these grants is not to spend money in an administratively correct way. As Pernilla has put also very nicely several times, the idea is to do good innovation and research with this public money. And it's the question how this is administered, that is, if you like, a secondary question. We also need to do this in a proper way, of course, but that is not the purpose of the program to do to spend money. The purpose is to do good research and innovation, and the funding, that is the means. And this is what we want to do in the simplest possible way. But the underlying description of work packages and work plans is the same for all these grants. And making a good description indeed helps you a lot when this is selected, because, again, as Pernilla pointed out very correctly, your proposal description of the work plan translates one-to-one into your grant agreement. You will find that back basically word by word in your grant agreement later on.
May I
sure,
add to
please,
this?
Mark.
What I think what it comes down to is also to be very proactive as a coordinator. I think coordination, stating the obvious, but it's all about communication. And not only for us as managers, but also especially from the scientific side. And it would be very unwise to wait out till the end, right? And I say this because sometimes I see that happening. Also, well, if you foresee that things are not delivered, then you also foresee that you might get a discussion internally in your consortium, and I think that's good. You as a coordinator, you simply should be able to listen what's going on in your project, to talk with your partners. Use the general assemblies for that. Use your executive board. We have one, so let's say with the work package leaders, and not let yourself surprise, and also intimate difficult parts of this communication, difficult parts of discussions, because I think it will only benefit the project as a whole, but also, well, your position as a coordinator, to be preemptive in some of these things, especially when it goes about, well, some partners getting less and, well, needing a discussion on that. So that's what I wanted to add. For example, another thing what we see now is with the huge inflation, is that partners say, oh, well, we cannot, how can we produce what was budgeted like several years ago? But even if you don't have the answer yet, you could feel the urgency or the hunch or the projection that this will at a certain point pop up in a bit more than just a theoretical item, right? So be preemptive, be proactive, talk, and drink lots of coffee with everyone in your consortium. And us as managers support our scientists in doing exactly that. Again, it's a bit obvious, but sometimes it's forgotten. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Maybe this keyword inflation, I would just like to add that, again, here the Commission is very much aware. Luckily, inflation has subsided a bit compared with the recent years right now, but no doubt this is still an important factor. What I'd like to highlight is there is absolutely no difference, because, again, a misunderstanding that sometimes persists. Inflation affects all our grants in the same way, because all our grants basically operate within a maximum envelope. You have a maximum grant amount in an actual cost grant, and you're expected, of course, also in an actual cost grant to carry out all the work. So you have it's not that in actual cost grant this is easier than in lump sums, because in lump sums you have a maximum and in actual cost you have a maximum. In both cases, you're expected to carry out the whole project. If you don't carry out the project, you face cuts. So that principle applies to all grants. It's the idea that in an actual cost grant you might just as well only carry out half the project and you are still paid in full is certainly not borne out by fact, and certainly not in line with the legal conditions that these grant agreements have. And it would also be, it goes without saying that you cannot just say, okay, in actual cost grants, it is not a problem because I simply skip half the project. No, that's not possible. The inflation is a general problem, of course, for all grants. I also know from national funders that typically there is no automatic indexing. So, I mean, there may be some exceptions somewhere. I'm not aware of all the national funding schemes, of course, but typically grant amounts are fixed and you are not getting an automatic indexation every year to increase the grant after it's been signed. And okay, this is definitely not the case for any EU grant, not limited to our program, but all the many dozens of other EU programs we have. None of these EU grants are indexed. We agree a certain project, we agree a certain maximum amount. You can get less, but you can never get more than this maximum. And you're expected to carry out the project within that envelope. So in that sense, lump sums are not more exposed to inflation than any other grant is that we sign. Maybe we go to the next question.
I can take this one. What about overheads, indirect costs in lump sums? You do get these indirect costs in lump sums as well. So there is a 25% flat rate that is calculated automatically in the Excel detail budget table. So at the moment when you prepare your proposal, so after you have put in the different cost estimations for the cost categories, the Excel table will, the Excel file will add automatically the 25% indirect costs into the lump sum share. So this is already embedded in the file. So these are not disappearing.
Yeah, the lump sum we calculate, in other words, contains the 25% overhead, and the flat rate is exactly the same as in all other grants. That's so you don't lose any indirect cost. It's exactly the same level, 25% flat rate. It's automatically calculated. You basically communicate through the inputs that you do the 100% of the cost that you have, and our Excel file is taking into account two things: the level of reimbursement, which in many or most cases is 100%, but not always. There can also be cases and situations where somebody only gets 70% or 60%, and then it adds always the 25% indirect cost. So this is taken into account. Next question. Details of activities is misleading. I'm not sure what you mean with that details of activities are misleading, but if you got an evaluation says that the budget was not justified, well, that of course is, we have experts who are experts in the field who also have experience with budgeting research proposals. Clearly you had a situation where they were not convinced by the explanations that you were giving. Now, it is not necessary to have a detailed explanation for each cost item, of course, but the project as a whole needs to basically motivate your budget. Maybe I go to the example of that I had before in my presentation of using senior staff. So if you use very senior staff for an activity that would maybe normally be perceived as something that can be done by a lab technician, then maybe and you don't really explain in very clear words why this particular time we need a senior scientist to do this task, then I could very well understand that the experts say that is not justified and that therefore they would criticize that. So, of course, there is no black and white on what is a good enough explanation. But, well, what I can also say is that roughly 90% of the selected lump sum grants are considered to have good budgets that don't need any change, where the experts come to the conclusion this is really nice and fitting the proposal. We don't see anything. So that really also to me shows they are not really picking on any tiny little thing that you could possibly criticize. Generally speaking, the things that they criticize as not being directly acceptable in the lump sum, the cases that I've seen, that are really cases where we have good reasons to doubt that this was an accurate or a plausible cost estimation. Next question.
how much of the pre-financing is given and how it can be distributed to beneficiaries if work packages start at different times and each work package has different sum share. So I think here we need to clarify that the pre-financing is calculated in the same way as for any other, as for actual cost grants in Horizon Europe. And this is not based on the start period of the work packages or on the different shares of the work packages. It is based on the maximum grant amount and on the number of reporting periods. So, for example, if your grant has 1 or 2 reporting periods, you would normally get 80% pre-financing of the maximum grant amount. And if you have a project with 3 reporting periods, I think you will get around 53% of the maximum of your maximum grant amount. And then this pre-financing will be distributed by the coordinator of the project according to the consortium agreement. So this is the internal cuisine of every grant. And yes, this is working in the same way.
Yeah, I can only confirm this is there is no direct link between who has which work package and how big each work package is. You have the same situation as in an actual cost grant. Also in actual cost grants, not every partner starts at the same time. Not every partner is involved in every work package. So the distribution of the pre-financing as such is not different. But again, maybe maybe the experienced coordinators want to say something if they did something different in terms of distribution of pre-financing or what the consortium rather agreed, because as Andrea rightly pointed out, this is typically agreed upon inside the consortium agreement. So it's an agreement between the partners. Don't know if any of you want to come in on how you handled the pre-financing practically. I don't.
In our case, we distributed it according to the payment done, especially at the first stage. So no difference there actually.
Okay. So you received the pre-financing and you split it sort of according to shares of beneficiaries and distributed this pre-financing at the beginning of the grant. Yeah, okay. I don't know, somebody else wants to come in on the pre-financing distribution?
No, we did the same.
You did the same, right? Okay. So really, key here is you agree inside your consortium agreement on how to do this. It's invisible to us. We are not part of that. But the pre-financing is really the same as in any other grant. And I think this was also a pointer from one of you three before. I should clarify, the pre-financing, technically speaking, is not the same as the payment that comes at the end of each reporting period, because it's really like a float. The idea is that you get the money to start, that you don't have to use your own resources, but this money has not yet been agreed, if you like. This pre-financing, technically speaking, is still the property. It is still owned by the Commission. These amounts are only then cleared and paid once we have accepted the work package, or in an actual cost grants, once we have accepted your cost declarations. That is the same. Pre-financing is always, if you like, is given to you, is entrusted to the consortium as a float to start the project, but is not yet considered your money. It is still Commission property, and if you could get a pre-financing in full and then you stop the project 2 weeks later, in which case we would ask for all this money back, because it's not yet been justified by execution of the project. But of course, by the end of the grant, you have justified all these amounts, and then obviously you don't pay it back. That's obvious. Next question. Is it true that proposal that ask for lower lump sum amounts get selected for funding? it is becoming an approach for many organizations. Please clarify. Well, we have not seen anything like that at all. I mean, what I can say, rather, the level of grants that we see is typically very similar, and the same is true for lump sums and any other grants. That is very close to the amount that is specified in the work program. So for each call and for each topic that we publish, this is part of a work program, and this topic typically tells you that the Commission expects to fund a certain number of projects at a certain approximate size. And while you are not bound to this budget size, what really happens is that applicants orient themselves quite a lot on this amount that is mentioned in the work program. So a typical case, we have a topic that funds 2 projects. The topic has an indicative budget of 10 million, and we tell you we normally expect to fund 2 projects of 5 million euro each year. What will happen in practice? Most applicants will apply for amounts very close to or precisely 5 million euros, and the 2 selected projects are very likely to be close to 5 million euros. That is not set in stone. In theory, there could also be one project funded for 10 million euro. That is not excluded, but that would be the exception. So indeed, in lump sum grants, as well as in all other grants, what we see is that applicants orient themselves, which is also quite normal, because that is sort of the guidance that we give. The topic description, the work program says, the Commission considers that projects in this area would have an appropriate budget of approximately X million euro, and then it is normal practice to actually design projects around this mark. I don't think that we have, let's say, a downwards competition with lump sum that pulls down the funding amount in lump sums, because also we don't increase. It's not that then we, in a lump sum case, we then say we now sneak in a third project. So we have a 10 million euro pre-agreed budget for that topic, that then in lump sums we say, oh, let's try and, instead of get 3 for the price of 2, instead of funding 5 million, we now fund 3. That is simply not happening. So you can also again look in this assessment which I mentioned, where you can see the levels of funding on average in research innovation projects and innovation projects and coordination support actions in lump sums versus actual cost grants. You see essentially there is no difference. What you see is that the average funding per work package is slightly lower in lump sums, and that is simply due to the fact, and I think we've seen Mark's project as one example, that people make use of the opportunity, of the possibility to split work packages. So indeed, lump sum grants have on average a higher number of work packages, and so the funding per work package is a bit lower, but that is simply due to the fact that the work packages are a bit smaller. So we don't see that effect. We are not aware, and I think our data do not show it. I also really emphasize, based on the structure, the way that we publish calls for proposals and the way the Commission work programs or the Horizon Europe work programs are designed, that doesn't give much leeway for this development. Next question.
Yes, maybe we can take 1 or 2 more questions.
Yeah, we are already over time, I see. Yes, we probably take 1 or 2 more questions and then call it a day, indeed.
Okay, so if a partner leaves the consortium, how to handle the process and termination reporting? They have worked in work packages that have not yet been completed and reported. Well, if a partner is leaving the consortium, so before the reporting period, before the work packages were assessed, they will not have to provide any financial reporting, and any amount due for this partner will be paid at the time when the work package in which they worked will be assessed. So if I understand from this question that they actually have worked in these work packages, so they will get their share at a subsequent reporting period from the coordinator of the project. So this is how it should be done.
Yeah. So in other words, that leaving partner, they will have to wait to be paid as if they had stayed in the project. Had they stayed in the project, they would also not have been paid at that point in time in the middle. They would only have been paid for that work package later, once it's been reported and completed and accepted and paid. So now that they leave earlier, they are in the same situation. They will not be paid for that work package at this point in time. So the consortium will be paid for that work package, and then it's down to the consortium agreement to reimburse that partner at the time that they receive the reimbursement for the work package for the share of that partner's contribution to that work package. So again, that would then be, that part is again internal cuisine of the consortium. So maybe just one more question. The number of reporting periods is not predefined. We have a guidance on what is a typical length of a reporting period. That is 18 months in Horizon Europe grants, and the same applies to lump sum projects. So typically we start from the assumption that you minimize the number of reporting periods to minimize the administration. So the multiple of 18 months that can fit in your project is the number of reporting periods. You saw, for example, you saw an example in the presentation of a 4-year project that would be classic 3 reporting periods, 18, 18, 12. That would be a very typical case, minimizing the number of reporting periods, 3 in this case, for a 4-year project. So I think here I cannot refrain from making a comment on the last question on the screen, because they mentioned the DESCA lump sum consortium agreement. Indeed, I think early, probably beginning of 23, or was it beginning of 24? No, I think it was the beginning of 2024. The DESCA consortium published a new consortium agreement, which for the first time, or a consortium agreement template, which for the first time also covers lump sums. And yeah, well, a lot could be said about that. I would say that this probably still comes from a time when the anxiety levels for lump sums were still higher. And so indeed, when you look at this dichotomous template that they provided, 1/2 for actual cost grants, 1/2 for lump sums, it really shows, in my view, too much that the attitude is that in actual cost grants, implementation doesn't matter, and that in lump sum grants, financing doesn't matter. Well, to me, only half is true. Indeed, the financial part in lump sums don't matter. We don't care. But the implementation is, of course, important. But yeah, I think I would wish that over time also the consortium agreement templates takes into account that you can have a little bit more trust in the process, and that indeed you don't need to be overly careful in lump sum grants, while in actual cost grants implementation doesn't matter at all. Neither of the two is true. Neither is implementation irrelevant in actual cost grants, nor are we judging you so much more strictly in lump sum grants that you have a real risk of not being paid. In other words, in both situations, if you do your project in good faith and you bring it to the end and you have informed your project officers of the developments, you have an extremely high certainty that your project is going to be paid 100% or 99%. That is really what we see in practice, and that is true for all our grants, independent of the funding mechanism. We don't make a change here. We don't depart from that principle that our grantees, our projects are effectively always paid in full if this project has been carried out properly and to the end and in a satisfactory way. And with that, I think I'd like to stop. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank in particular our 3 speakers, our experienced speakers, for their contribution. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have further questions as you are preparing for proposals, don't hesitate to contact the Research Inquiry Service. Make use of the guidance material that we provide. Watch the videos, and otherwise there are other resources available, such as your national contact points. with that, I wish you good luck and all the best for your next proposal.
Thank you very much.